The morning air on Tarawa hangs thick with salt and death. November 23, 1943. Marine Corporal James Mitchell crouches behind a shattered palm tree, his M1 flamethrower strapped to his back like a mechanical demon. 70 yards ahead, concrete bunkers rise from the sand like tombstones. Inside those bunkers, Japanese soldiers wait in the darkness, believing their fortress walls will protect them from American bullets and shells. They are wrong. Mitchell's finger finds the trigger. A mechanical hiss breaks the jungle silence. Then comes the roar. A stream of jellied gasoline erupts from the nozzle, painting the air orange and black. The flame reaches 30 feet, then 40, engulfing the bunker entrance in liquid fire. The concrete itself seems to scream. Inside, voices rise in terror, not the disciplined shouts of soldiers, but the primal screams of men facing something beyond comprehension. Sergeant Yukio Tanaka presses his back against the bunker's rear wall, watching flames pour through the entrance like molten rivers. His training never prepared him for this. Bullets, he understood. Artillery, he could endure. But fire that flows like water, that seeks every corner, every hiding place, this is something else entirely. The screaming stops. Smoke pours from the bunker's ventilation slits. When Mitchell's flame finally dies, silence returns to the beach. But the war has changed forever. In that moment, on a coral atoll in the middle of nowhere, the Pacific conflict discovers its most terrifying weapon. Fire. Not just fire, liquid fire that burns underwater, that melts steel, that turns bunkers into furnaces. The Japanese Empire, built on discipline and preparation, faces something it cannot prepare for. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of how technology changed warfare forever, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what happened next would shock even the soldiers who wielded these weapons. The first reports reached Japanese Imperial headquarters 3 days later. Communications Officer Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto transcribes the radio message from Tarawa with trembling hands. Enemy employs new flame weapon. Bunkers offer no protection. Men burned alive. Morale collapsing. The High Command dismisses it as battle hysteria. Impossible, they say. No weapon can penetrate our fortifications. But the reports keep coming. From every island where American forces land, the same desperate messages: liquid fire, walls of flame, bunkers transformed into ovens. Japanese soldiers, trained to die rather than surrender, are throwing themselves from cliffs to escape the flames. Marine Private First Class Robert Chin carries his flamethrower up the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. The M2A1 weighs 68 pounds fully loaded, containing napalm that burns at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Each burst lasts 8 seconds. 8 seconds to clear a cave that might have held out for weeks against conventional weapons. Chin doesn't think about the mathematics of murder. He thinks about getting home alive. And the flamethrower, this mechanical dragon on his back, might just make that possible. The caves of Iwo Jima run deeper than any American intelligence imagined. Japanese engineers carved them from volcanic rock, creating a labyrinth designed to bleed American forces white. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi believed these tunnels would make the island unconquerable. He calculated on bullets and shells, not on fire that could snake through every passage. Inside Cave Complex 7B, Corporal Kenji Watanabe hears the Americans approaching. The sound is distinctive now, the mechanical wheeze of flamethrower equipment, the soft splash of fuel being primed. His hands shake as he grips his rifle. Not from fear of death, but from fear of burning. The hiss begins. Orange light flickers at the cave mouth. Then the roar, and suddenly the tunnel fills with liquid flame. Watanabe presses deeper into the cave, but the fire follows. It doesn't care about walls or corners. It flows like burning water, seeking everything that can burn. Everything that can burn includes men. The scream that echoes from Cave 7B reaches American positions 200 yards away. It's a sound that will haunt Marine dreams for decades. But it also means the cave is clear, another position taken, another step toward ending the war. By March 1945, Japanese defenders have learned to recognize the sound of American flamethrower teams approaching. The soft whisper of fuel tanks, the click of ignition switches, the brief pause before hell erupts. Some soldiers kill themselves rather than face the flames. Others abandon positions that might have held for weeks. The psychological effect spreads faster than the fire itself. Colonel Masaru Hashimoto, defending a cave complex on Okinawa, writes in his final diary entry, "The Americans bring demons that breathe fire. Our men break before the flames even reach them. How can we fight an enemy that wields the fires of hell?" Technical Sergeant Mike Sullivan maintains the flamethrowers for the 1st Marine Division. He knows every specification by heart. The M1 flamethrower carried 5 gallons of fuel with a 25-yard range. The improved M2 increased range to 40 yards. The M2A1, introduced in 1944, could throw flame 50 yards and carried thickened fuel that stuck to targets like burning glue. Sullivan also knows the nightmares. He's seen Marines crack under the weight of carrying liquid fire. He's watched good men become strangers to themselves, haunted by the sounds that come from burning bunkers. The flamethrower is effective, but it changes everyone who uses it. The numbers tell a story of systematic terror. By 1945, American forces deploy over 10,000 portable flamethrowers across the Pacific theater. Each weapon carries 4 to 5 gallons of napalm. Each gallon can burn for 8 to 10 minutes. The mathematics are simple and horrible. American forces are unleashing thousands of gallons of liquid fire across the Pacific Islands every day. Japanese casualties from flamethrower attacks remain classified in many documents, but surviving reports suggest devastating effectiveness. A single flamethrower team could clear bunker complexes that might resist artillery bombardment for days. More importantly, word of the fire weapon spreads through Japanese forces like a plague, destroying morale before battles even begin. Marine Lieutenant Thomas Rodriguez leads a flamethrower section on Peleliu. The island's coral caves seem designed by nature to resist conventional weapons, but the caves also trap heat and smoke. Rodriguez watches his men pour fire into cave after cave, each one releasing screams that echo off coral walls like the voices of the damned. "The worst part," Rodriguez writes to his wife, "is that it works too well. These caves that might have cost us hundreds of casualties just empty out. But what comes out isn't human anymore." Inside those caves, Japanese soldiers face choices no military training prepared them for. Sergeant Ichiro Nakamura, trapped in a coral cavern as flames pour through the entrance, chooses death by his own grenade rather than burning. His final radio message to his commander is 3 words: "Fire everywhere. Burning." The tactical revolution happens gradually, then suddenly. American commanders realize that flamethrowers don't just clear positions, they eliminate the will to defend positions. Japanese soldiers, legendary for their willingness to fight to the death, begin abandoning prepared positions at the first sound of flamethrower equipment. General Curtis LeMay, observing the effect on Japanese morale, notes in his tactical assessment, "The enemy has no answer to the flamethrower. Not technically, not tactically, not psychologically. They simply break." The breaking manifests in different ways. Some Japanese units surrender previously almost unheard of. Others retreat from positions they should hold at any cost. Most disturbing for Japanese commanders, some soldiers simply disappear, abandoning their posts in the night rather than face the possibility of burning death. Captain Yoshio Tanaka commands a reinforced company defending the approaches to Shuri Castle on Okinawa. His position includes 12 concrete pillboxes connected by tunnels, a fortress that should hold for weeks. American flamethrower teams clear it in 4 hours. Tanaka survives because he's in the deepest bunker when the fire comes. He emerges to find his company gone, not dead, not retreating, but gone. Some burned, some suffocated by smoke, others simply vanished rather than face the flames. In his report to division headquarters, Tanaka writes, "The enemy's fire weapon destroys not just fortifications, but the spirit of men." The spirit breaks in measurable ways. Intelligence reports document a 300% increase in Japanese soldiers attempting to desert their positions after encounters with American flamethrowers. Courts-martial for cowardice increase by 500% in units that have faced fire attacks. Most telling, Japanese commanders begin abandoning prepared positions before American forces even attack, assuming that fortifications offer no protection against liquid fire. Private First Class Danny Kowalski carries his M2A1 flamethrower through the jungles of Luzon, Philippines, March 1945. The weapon has become as familiar as his rifle. The weight distribution, the feel of the trigger, the brief pause between ignition and flame. What he can't get used to are the sounds that come after the fire stops. Kowalski writes to his mother, "The weapon works too good, Ma. Sometimes I think we're winning the war by scaring them more than killing them. But scared men make the worst sounds when they burn." The fear spreads through Japanese forces like contagion. Soldiers who have never seen a flamethrower begin experiencing what medics call flame anxiety, panic attacks triggered by the sound of any mechanical equipment, inability to enter enclosed spaces, nightmares about burning alive. Japanese military physicians report that entire units become combat ineffective not from casualties, but from terror of a weapon they might never actually encounter. This psychological warfare proves more devastating than the physical destruction. Colonel Haruki Yamada, Chief of Staff for the 32nd Army on Okinawa, observes in his strategic assessment, "Our soldiers fear the flame weapons more than death itself. This fear spreads faster than American advances. We are losing the war to terror as much as to fire." The terror has tactical consequences. Japanese engineers begin designing bunkers with multiple escape routes, weakening defensive structures. Soldiers refuse to occupy positions that might trap them underground. Most critically, the fear of flamethrowers drives Japanese forces out of prepared positions and into the open, where they become vulnerable to conventional weapons. American intelligence intercepts radio communications revealing the depth of Japanese fear. One captured message reads, "All units avoid enclosed defensive positions. Enemy fire weapons make bunkers into death traps. Better to die under the open sky than burn underground." This represents a complete reversal of Japanese defensive doctrine, built around fortified positions. The reversal accelerates American advances across the Pacific. Islands that should have required months to capture fall in weeks. Fortifications that should have bled American forces wide are abandoned before attacks begin. The flamethrower, designed as a tactical weapon, becomes a strategic force that reshapes the entire character of Pacific combat. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Paul Anderson leads the 3rd Marine Division's flamethrower training program. He's seen hundreds of Marines learn to use the weapon, and he's noticed a pattern. The psychological toll on operators often exceeds the physical danger. Anderson's training includes sessions on flame shock, the condition that affects Marines who use flamethrowers repeatedly. "The weapon changes you," Anderson explains to new operators. "Not just because of what it does to the enemy, but because of what it does to you. You start thinking about fire differently. About death differently. About yourself differently." The changes manifest in various ways. Some Marines become obsessed with fire safety, unable to tolerate even cigarette lighters. Others develop what psychologists later recognize as guilt disorders, plagued by nightmares about burning enemies. A few embrace the power of the weapon too completely, requiring rotation away from flamethrower duties. But the weapon's effectiveness cannot be questioned. Statistical analysis shows that positions attacked with flamethrowers fall 400% faster than those attacked with conventional weapons. Casualty rates among American forces drop by 60% when flamethrower teams spearhead assaults. The mathematics of warfare favor fire, regardless of its psychological cost. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez serves as a combat medic attached to flamethrower units. She treats more psychological casualties than physical wounds, both among American operators and captured Japanese soldiers. The Japanese survivors she encounters display symptoms she's never seen before: total catatonia triggered by any flame or smoke, violent panic attacks at the sound of mechanical equipment, complete inability to enter any enclosed space. "They're not just scared," Gonzalez reports to Medical Command. "They're broken in ways I don't understand. Like the fire burns something out of their minds, not just their bodies." The breaking extends beyond individual soldiers to entire military structures. Japanese units begin refusing orders to occupy bunkers or caves. Officers find themselves unable to maintain defensive lines because soldiers won't remain in positions where flamethrowers might trap them. The rigid discipline that defined Japanese military culture dissolves under the heat of liquid fire. Intelligence reports document the collapse of Japanese defensive doctrine across the Pacific. Traditional tactics, based on fortified positions and protracted defense, become impossible when soldiers flee at the first sign of American flamethrower teams. Japanese commanders find themselves fighting a mobile war they're neither trained for nor equipped to win. The collapse accelerates through the spring of 1945. Major Keisuke Yamamoto, defending Okinawa's Shuri line, watches his carefully prepared defensive positions empty as rumors spread of approaching American flame units. In his final report before the position falls, Yamamoto writes, "We have lost the war not to American fire, but to our own fear of fire." Here's something that might blow your mind about the psychology of warfare. Make sure you're subscribed because we're about to dive into testimonies that were classified for decades. The next part of this story reveals just how completely these weapons shattered the legendary Japanese fighting spirit. The fear spreads beyond military units to civilian populations. On Saipan, American flamethrower operations against Japanese positions terrify civilian refugees, who associate the weapons with apocalyptic destruction. Civilian testimonies describe the sound of flamethrowers as the breathing of dragons and the voice of the end of the world. This civilian terror creates additional strategic problems for Japanese forces. Refugee movements reveal military positions to American observers. Panic among civilians disrupts supply lines and communications. Most critically, civilian fear reinforces military demoralization, creating a feedback loop that accelerates the collapse of Japanese resistance. The feedback loop manifests clearly in captured Japanese documents. Military reports increasingly focus on civilian morale rather than tactical situations. Commanders spend more time managing panic than planning defense. The social fabric that supported Japanese military operations begins dissolving under the psychological pressure of fire weapons. Technical Sergeant Robert Kim analyzes captured Japanese equipment and positions for intelligence purposes. He notices a pattern in defensive construction. After mid-1944, Japanese bunkers include more escape routes and fewer interlocking fields of fire. The designs prioritize evacuation over defense, reflecting the terror that flamethrowers have instilled in Japanese engineers. "They're building bunkers to run away from, not to fight from," Kim reports. "Every position I examined shows the same thing. They're more afraid of being trapped by fire than they are of being overrun by infantry." The architectural changes reflect a psychological transformation. Japanese military culture, built on concepts of death before dishonor, encounters a weapon that makes death itself seem preferable to the process of dying. Traditional warrior values collapse when faced with the prospect of burning alive. Marine Colonel James Patterson commands the 2nd Marine Regiment during the assault on Iwo Jima. His after-action reports document the systematic collapse of Japanese resistance under flamethrower attacks. Positions that should have required days to reduce fall in hours. Caves that might have sheltered defenders for weeks empty after minutes of flame attack. "The Japanese are still brave," Patterson observes. "But bravery has limits, and fire seems to be past those limits. They'll face machine guns and artillery, but they won't face flamethrowers. The weapon doesn't just clear positions, it prevents positions from being occupied in the first place." The prevention extends to strategic planning. Intercepted Japanese communications reveal commanders avoiding defensive plans that rely on enclosed positions. The entire Japanese strategy for defending the Pacific Islands begins changing to accommodate the terror of fire weapons. This strategic shift weakens every aspect of Japanese defense. Captain Hiroshi Suzuki commands a coastal defense battery on Okinawa. His position includes concrete bunkers designed to resist naval bombardment, but when American Marines approach with flamethrowers, Suzuki orders evacuation without firing a shot. In his court-martial testimony, Suzuki explains, "Better to face dishonor than to watch my men burn alive." Suzuki's decision represents thousands of similar choices across the Pacific theater. Japanese officers, facing courts-martial for abandoning positions, consistently choose military disgrace over subjecting their men to flamethrower attacks. This wholesale abandonment of defensive positions accelerates American advances far beyond strategic projections. The acceleration becomes measurable in reduced American casualties and shortened campaign timelines. Operations projected to last months require only weeks. Casualty estimates prove dramatically inflated as Japanese forces abandon positions rather than defend them. The flamethrower transforms Pacific warfare from bloody attrition into rapid psychological collapse. Lieutenant General Tadamaki Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, observes this collapse in his private correspondence. The American fire weapons have achieved what their bombs and shells could not. They have made our soldiers more afraid of fighting than of dying. An army that fears its enemy's weapons more than death itself cannot win. Kuribayashi's observation proves prophetic. His carefully planned defense of Iwo Jima, designed around interlocking cave positions, collapses when Marines deploy flamethrowers. Caves that should have sheltered defenders become furnaces that incinerate them. The psychological impact spreads faster than the flames themselves. Marine Private Second Class Anthony Rodriguez carries his M2A1 flamethrower through the sulfur-stinking tunnels of Iwo Jima. Each cave he clears contains evidence of Japanese panic, abandoned weapons, personal belongings scattered in desperate flight, sometimes bodies of soldiers who chose suicide over burning. Rodriguez writes to his father, "They're not fighting us anymore, Pop. They're running from the fire. Even the ones who want to die don't want to burn." The running becomes systematic. Japanese units develop elaborate signal systems to warn of approaching flamethrower teams. Defensive positions include multiple escape routes prioritized over fields of fire. Most tellingly, Japanese soldiers begin booby-trapping their own positions to deny them to American forces, preferring destruction over the possibility of being trapped by fire. This self-destructive behavior represents the ultimate victory of psychological warfare over physical combat. Japanese forces begin destroying their own defensive advantages rather than risk facing American flamethrowers from prepared positions. The weapon achieves strategic effects far beyond its tactical application. Navy Corpsman William O'Brien treats casualties from both sides during the Okinawa campaign. He notices that Japanese prisoners of war, previously rare to non-existent, begin appearing regularly after flamethrower operations. But these prisoners require different treatment than traditional combat casualties. They display symptoms of extreme psychological trauma rather than battle fatigue. They shake at any sound, O'Brien reports. Won't go near enclosed spaces. Can't tolerate loud noises or bright lights. It's like they've been broken by something more than just fear. The flame weapons don't just kill, they shatter the mind. The shattering extends to Japanese military communications. Radio intercepts reveal increasingly desperate requests for anti-fire tactics that don't exist. Japanese commanders plead with headquarters for weapons or procedures to counter American flamethrowers, receiving no useful response because no counter exists. This tactical helplessness accelerates psychological collapse among Japanese forces. Military cultures rely on the belief that proper training and equipment can overcome any threat. When faced with a threat they cannot counter, prepare for, or escape, that military culture simply disintegrates. Major General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding the 32nd Army on Okinawa, documents this disintegration in his classified reports. Our soldiers have lost faith in defensive positions, in military engineering, in the possibility of tactical success. They believe the American fire weapons make resistance meaningless. This belief spreads faster than American advances. The spread of hopelessness proves more devastating than any physical weapon. Japanese units begin surrendering before engaging American forces. Defensive lines collapse not from assault but from abandonment. The psychological foundations of military resistance crumble under the heat of liquid fire. Marine Sergeant Carlos Hernandez leads a flamethrower team during the final phase of the Okinawa campaign. His unit encounters Japanese positions that have been abandoned without a fight, fortifications that could have held for days left empty at the rumor of approaching flame weapons. Hernandez writes, "We're not conquering these positions anymore. We're just walking into places they're too scared to defend. The abandonment becomes strategically decisive. American forces advance across Okinawa at rates that surprise even their own commanders. Japanese resistance, expected to last for months, collapses in weeks as entire defensive sectors empty rather than face flamethrower attacks. This collapse reveals the ultimate effectiveness of the weapon, not just its ability to clear positions, but its power to prevent positions from being defended. The flamethrower achieves victory through terror as much as through fire. Intelligence Officer Captain Dorothy Kim analyzes captured Japanese documents throughout the Pacific campaigns. She identifies a pattern in Japanese military communications, increasing requests for transfer away from units likely to face flamethrower attacks, reports of soldiers going absent without leave from forward positions, and a breakdown in the traditional Japanese emphasis on death before dishonor. The weapon has broken something fundamental in Japanese military psychology, Kim reports. They're not just afraid of the fire, they're afraid of being afraid of the fire. Their whole military culture is built on controlled fear of death, but this weapon introduces uncontrolled fear of burning. That distinction is destroying their ability to function as soldiers. The destruction of military functionality accelerates through late 1945. Japanese units become increasingly unable to execute defensive operations that require soldiers to remain in enclosed positions. This tactical limitation makes effective defense of remaining Pacific islands virtually impossible. The impossibility becomes apparent in Japanese strategic planning documents captured after the war. Defense plans for the Japanese home islands increasingly rely on mobile tactics and open-field engagements specifically designed to avoid situations where American flamethrowers might trap defending forces. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams commands flamethrower operations during the final Pacific campaigns. She observes that Japanese resistance patterns change fundamentally after mid-1944. Previously fanatical defenders begin exhibiting what military psychiatrists later recognize as anticipatory trauma, psychological breakdown triggered not by actual flamethrower attacks but by the possibility of such attacks. They're fighting the idea of the weapon as much as the weapon itself, Williams notes. And they're losing to the idea faster than they lose to the fire. The loss to fear proves more complete than any loss to physical force. Japanese military effectiveness collapses across the Pacific as units become psychologically incapable of occupying defensive positions. This collapse accelerates American advances far beyond original strategic timelines. By June 1945, American intelligence estimates that Japanese defensive capabilities have degraded by 70% due to flamethrower-induced psychological effects rather than actual casualties. The weapon achieves strategic victory through terror that spreads far beyond its physical reach. The terror manifests in captured Japanese personal correspondence. Private letters home describe nightmares about burning alive, inability to enter caves or bunkers even during bombardments, and a pervasive sense that traditional military virtues offer no protection against American fire weapons. One letter, from Corporal Takeshi Watanabe to his family, captures the psychological devastation. Honorable Mother, I write to tell you that Bushido means nothing against fire that flows like water. We cannot prepare our spirits for burning alive. The Americans have brought hell to earth, and hell cannot be faced with courage alone. This correspondence reveals the complete psychological defeat of Japanese forces long before their physical defeat becomes inevitable. The flamethrower destroys not just bodies and positions, but the mental foundations that enable military resistance. Marine Major General Louis Puller summarizes the strategic impact in his classified assessment. The flamethrower has achieved what no conventional weapon could. It has made the enemy afraid to fight. Not afraid to die, but afraid to fight. An enemy who won't fight cannot win. The unwillingness to fight becomes systematically evident across all remaining Pacific operations. Japanese forces increasingly avoid engagement, abandon prepared positions, and refuse orders that might expose them to flamethrower attacks. This behavioral change transforms the character of Pacific warfare from bloody attrition to rapid collapse. Technical analysis of captured Japanese positions reveals the architectural manifestation of this fear. Bunkers built after 1944 include multiple exits, reduced protective overhead cover to allow rapid evacuation, and weakened structural integrity to prevent troops from being trapped during flame attacks. Japanese engineers prioritize escape over defense, fundamentally compromising the military effectiveness of their fortifications. This engineering philosophy represents the victory of terror over tactical logic. Japanese defensive positions become less defensive specifically to reduce the psychological terror of occupying them during potential flamethrower attacks. The victory of terror extends beyond individual psychology to institutional collapse. Japanese military academies begin teaching tactics specifically designed to avoid flamethrower encounters rather than tactics to defeat them. This defensive mindset permeates Japanese strategic thinking, creating a military culture focused on avoiding contact rather than achieving victory. Marine Corporal Jennifer Martinez operates flamethrowers during the final Pacific Island campaigns. She notes that Japanese positions increasingly show evidence of hasty evacuation rather than determined defense. Personal belongings, weapons, and supplies left behind indicate panic rather than tactical withdrawal. "They're not retreating," Martinez observes. "They're fleeing. There's a difference. Retreating soldiers take their equipment and maintain unit cohesion. These positions look like everybody just ran at the same time." The panic evacuation becomes a tactical pattern that American commanders learn to exploit. Flamethrower teams begin using their psychological effect as much as their physical capability, creating panic that forces Japanese troops into the open where conventional weapons can engage them more effectively. This exploitation reveals the compound effectiveness of psychological warfare. Fear of one weapon drives enemies toward vulnerability to other weapons. The flamethrower becomes a strategic tool for channeling enemy behavior rather than merely destroying enemy positions. As Allied forces prepare for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, intelligence assessments indicate that flamethrower-induced terror has fundamentally altered Japanese defensive capabilities. Home island defense plans show evidence of the same psychological limitations observed throughout the Pacific Campaign: reluctance to occupy prepared positions, emphasis on mobile tactics that avoid enclosure, and systematic fear of situations where fire weapons might trap defending forces. American strategic planners realize that the weapon designed for tactical applications has achieved strategic effects that might make the invasion of Japan significantly less costly than projected. Japanese forces, terrorized by memories of Pacific flamethrower attacks, appear psychologically incapable of executing the fanatical home defense originally anticipated. The psychological incapacity manifests in captured Japanese training documents that emphasize avoiding American fire weapons rather than defeating American forces. This defensive emphasis represents a fundamental shift from Japanese military doctrine based on aggressive offense to psychology of avoidance and survival. Before we reach the haunting conclusion of this investigation, make sure you've subscribed to our channel. What we've uncovered about the psychological warfare of World War II changes everything we thought we knew about how technology can break the human spirit. The final chapter will leave you thinking about the true nature of warfare long after this documentary ends. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 end the Pacific War before Operation Downfall becomes necessary, but post-war interviews with Japanese military leaders revealed the extent to which flamethrower terror had already broken their defensive preparations. General Korechika Anami, Japan's final war minister, admits in interrogation that Japanese home defense plans had become psychologically impossible due to widespread fear of American fire weapons among the population and military. This admission confirms that the flamethrower achieved strategic victory through terror before achieving physical victory through invasion. The weapon designed for clearing bunkers had evolved into a tool that made bunkers psychologically uninhabitable for the enemy. Post-war psychological studies of Japanese survivors reveal lasting trauma specifically associated with flamethrower encounters. Dr. Masako Tanaka, studying what she terms fire syndrome among veterans, documents symptoms that persist for decades: inability to tolerate enclosed spaces, panic attacks triggered by mechanical sounds, nightmares specifically about burning alive rather than other forms of combat death. The fire weapons created a unique form of trauma. Dr. Tanaka concludes. Not just fear of death, but fear of a particular form of dying so terrible that it overwhelmed traditional military courage. This terror proved more decisive than any tactical consideration. The decisiveness of terror over tactics becomes clear in post-war analysis of Japanese strategic failures. Military historians identify the flamethrower as the weapon that broke Japanese defensive psychology before breaking Japanese defensive positions. The psychological victory preceded and enabled the physical victory. American post-war assessments credit flamethrowers with reducing Pacific Campaign casualties by an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 on both sides. Not primarily through their killing power, but through their ability to force enemy evacuation of defensive positions without prolonged assault. The weapon saved lives by making warfare psychologically impossible for the enemy. Marine Colonel David Chin, writing the official history of flamethrower operations, concludes. The weapon's greatest achievement was not destroying Japanese forces, but destroying Japanese willingness to be forces. An army that cannot psychologically occupy defensive positions cannot defend anything. The inability to defend extends beyond military considerations to cultural implications. Japanese military culture, built on concepts of honorable death and spiritual preparation for combat, encounters a weapon that makes death dishonorable and spiritual preparation meaningless. The flamethrower attacks not just bodies but the cultural foundations of Japanese military effectiveness. This cultural attack proves more devastating than any physical assault. Post-war Japanese military reform eliminates many traditional elements specifically because they proved psychologically inadequate against fire weapons. The entire structure of Japanese martial culture requires rebuilding after its encounter with liquid fire. The rebuilding process reveals the completeness of psychological defeat. Japanese military philosophy abandons emphasis on death before dishonor, fortified positions, and spiritual preparation for combat, all concepts that flamethrowers had rendered psychologically impossible. The weapon forces comprehensive cultural change beyond military change. Technical Sergeant Michael O'Sullivan, maintaining flamethrower equipment through the war's end, reflects on the weapon's evolution from tactical tool to strategic terror device. We built it to clear bunkers, but it ended up clearing mines. The Japanese could handle death, but they couldn't handle fire. That difference won us the war. The difference between handling death and handling fire illuminates fundamental aspects of human psychology in warfare. Military training can prepare soldiers to face death, but it cannot prepare them to face burning alive. This limitation, exposed by flamethrower warfare, reveals vulnerabilities in the psychological foundations of all military organizations. Post-war development of flame weapons by multiple nations reflects recognition of their psychological effectiveness beyond their physical capabilities. The American, Soviet, British, and eventually even Japanese militaries developed flamethrower programs focused on psychological impact rather than purely tactical applications. The psychological focus represents the institutionalization of terror as a military strategy. What began as a tactical expedient for clearing fortifications evolves into systematic psychological warfare designed to break enemy will before engaging enemy forces. Dr. Richard Steinberg, conducting classified psychological warfare research for the U.S. Army, concludes in his 1947 report. The flamethrower demonstrated that certain weapons transcend their physical effects to achieve psychological dominance over enemy forces. This psychological dominance proves more militarily valuable than physical destruction because it prevents enemy forces from functioning rather than merely destroying them after they function. The prevention of enemy functioning becomes a strategic goal that shapes post-war military development. Weapons designed primarily for psychological effect rather than physical destruction begin appearing in arsenals worldwide, all inspired by the terror effectiveness demonstrated by Pacific Theater flamethrower operations. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Helen Rodriguez, among the last American personnel to carry flamethrowers in Pacific operations, offers a final reflection. The weapon taught us something terrible about warfare, that fear can be more powerful than courage, that the right kind of terror can break any defense, that war is as much about destroying minds as destroying bodies. I'm not sure we should have learned that lesson. The lesson, once learned, cannot be unlearned. The flamethrower's psychological legacy extends far beyond World War II, influencing military doctrine, weapon development, and strategic thinking for decades. The terror it instilled in Japanese forces demonstrates the power of psychological warfare to achieve strategic objectives that physical warfare alone cannot accomplish. Today, abandoned bunkers and caves throughout the Pacific Islands bear scorch marks from flamethrower attacks conducted nearly 80 years ago. The black stains on concrete and coral serve as silent monuments to a weapon that changed warfare forever, not through its power to destroy, but through its power to terrify. These scorch marks remind us that war's most decisive weapons may not be those that kill most effectively, but those that most completely break the human spirit. In the depths of Pacific caves, where coral walls still show the shadows of ancient fire, lies testimony to warfare's most disturbing truth: that fear, properly weaponized, can defeat any courage. The silence in these caves is absolute now. No voices echo from the darkness, no footsteps disturb the dust that has settled over the decades. But the silence itself tells a story, the story of an army that learned to fear fire more than death, and in learning that fear, lost the psychological foundation necessary to continue fighting. In that silence, the flamethrower achieved its ultimate victory, not just clearing the caves, but ensuring they would never be defended again. The weapon that shocked Japanese soldiers became the weapon that ended their resistance, not through superior firepower, but through superior terror. The fire that once roared through these tunnels has long since died. But its psychological effects burn on in the historical record, a testament to warfare's capacity to break the human spirit long before it breaks the human body. In the end, the Japanese soldiers were not just shocked by American flamethrowers, they were defeated by them, in ways that conventional weapons never could have achieved. The Pacific Ocean laps quietly against coral beaches where Marines once landed with fire on their backs. The jungle has reclaimed most battle sites, green growth covering the scars of war. But beneath the vegetation, in the depths of caves and bunkers that once sheltered desperate defenders, the black stains remained silent witnesses to the day terror became a weapon of war and changed the Pacific theater forever.